I mean, I could see the summit. And, I mean, it's hard now to really still talk about it. But if you can imagine, it was every color that your brain can come up with, right? That's how it seemed to me at that time. I had never been this high in my life. When I saw the summit, I knew. And I remember thinking, it's like, my God, Gary, this is that next step. You know, this is that next step. And as soon as I had that thought, my friend yells out, Guller, I'm falling, Guller, I'm falling. And I looked back very quickly behind me, and he had basically come off this little ice step and was falling backwards. So I immediately went down into the ice to try to stop his fall with my ice axe, and we're hooked together, tied together in the same rope team. And before I could do that, he pulled me off the ice, and then I pulled my climbing partner and best buddy off the ice, and got 1,500, maybe 1,600 feet later, we just stopped. And on the second day, I lost my best friend, and thankfully, you know, a day and a half after that, some folks found us.
All right, we're live. What is going on, everybody?
Welcome, Jan. It's great to see you. How's the snow in Canton, Ohio? Hopefully it's not too much here.
It's happy to wake up and see, because for those of you that don't know where I'm kind of located, I'm right smack dab in the center of downtown Canton. Outside of my one window is a direct view of the new Centennial. Seeing it covered in snow, beautiful. So I'm excited because it's the first time I've really seen this much snow in downtown Canton. It's actually really pretty.
Well, anyway, let's kick this off. I see we're on the live stream. I want to welcome all the Apex Chasers. This is our 8th installment of the Disruptor segment of the Apex podcast. And even though the main focus of our podcast is typically around digital disruption and what's going on in the industry around digital businesses and design thinking and empathetic selling and things like that, I think everyone would agree that 2020 has pitched us the mother of all disruptive curveballs, so to speak. And as a result, we should kick off 2021 season of Disruptor Podcast and this live stream with a bit of motivation from a gentleman named Gary Guller. He's a motivational speaker. He's an athlete. He's an author. He's an Ironman. He's an ultramarathoner. He's a mountaineer extraordinaire. And so we have the great pleasure of bringing him in. But before we do, we have a lot to explore with Gary today. But before we do that, John's going to run a short 2-minute film clip from ABC World News.
Awesome. This is exciting. I'm starting to feel like Jamie from Joe Rogan. We're getting there, John. We're leveling up. All right. I'm gonna play this video.
Two stories tonight about human achievement and the quest for overcoming obstacles, and they come from the sports of mountain climbing and golf. Mountain climbing first, and Mount Everest, which has fascinated man for centuries. It is foreboding. It is beautiful. It is mysterious. ABC's Mark Litke is at Mount Everest.
It's been a remarkable week of firsts on the world's highest peak, but perhaps the most inspiring first today was that of 36-year-old American Gary Guller, who lost his left arm in a climbing accident 4 years ago. He had led a team of Texans with disabilities on a grueling 17-day trek to Everest Base Camp, a remarkable Everest first in its own right. But then Guller immediately began his own assault on the summit, the first attempt by a climber with one arm. It was treacherous from the start, as fierce winds slowed his team's advance for days. But as fast as it deteriorates, weather can suddenly improve on Everest, and after a 17-hour final push today, Gary Guller stood on top of the world.
Awesome. So I am super excited to have on our show someone that I believe truly exudes the Apex tagline, John. Ordinary people accomplishing extraordinary things. Again, ordinary people accomplishing extraordinary things. Easy for me to say. Anyway, a little bit about Gary. He was featured as an award-winning documentary filmmaker in a film called Team Everest, A Himalayan Journey, and was the climbing advisor for a documentary called Sherpa Stew. Both of them I've watched, and they're excellent. I highly recommend them. He's also a co-author of a book called Make Others Greater, From Mount Everest to the Boardroom. Vital lessons from dynamic innovators, explorers, and everyday heroes that will inspire the way you lead. In addition, Gary is also the founder of Make Others Greater. It's a U.S. 501c3 not-for-profit that's serving remote areas around the world, including Nepal, with medical supplies, school supplies, and healthcare initiatives. So please welcome to the Disruptor, Mr. Gary Guller.
Hey, everyone. Good morning. Nice seeing you guys.
Namaste, Gary. Thank you for joining us.
I swear to you, to everyone, even now, when I watch that ABC World News Tonight clip and I hear my name and Charlie Gibson and Mount Everest and the summit and the team that went to base camp, I hope the feeling never goes away. My hands still get sweaty. I've watched this thing 20,000 times. My heart starts beating really fast. And, it's just, there are a number of bumps along the journey for sure, but ultimately there was success. And I'm just honored to share the story and start my week out, start my morning out at this level. So it's great to be here.
Well, good. Thank you. Yeah, I tell you what, in prepping for this show, I got real nostalgic and really sort of want to go back to Nepal if I can, one of these days. It's a really special place. But anyway, hey, I have another podcasting friend of mine that always says that everyone was born into someone else's story. And obviously you have a great story. I wondered if you could give us a little bit of I'll let you give a little bit of background, particularly even a little before the actual accident, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, not at all. I was a teenager, right? And I was a bit of a free spirit kind of teenager. And basically somebody took me rock climbing one day and really got into it, really enjoyed it. And back in those days, this was in the 70s, right? In the Southeast down in Carolina. And there wasn't many of us out on the rock. And we looked a little bit different from kind of everybody else in a way. And a lot of people, especially in the Southeast, they weren't really quite sure how to sort of take the rock climbing community back then. And I just really got into it. And some really wonderful, they were probably old guys, they were 18 or 19 at the time, right? Took me under their wing, just kind of showed me the ropes, and not just necessarily the ropes literally on the rock face, but kind of another way of looking at life and how you should appreciate the feeling that you get when you're in nature, when you're on the rock, when the sun is on your back, you get to the top, and then you sort of enjoy and celebrate, together. And one of my first jobs, John, was as a assistant for a nonprofit. And what we did, we went to a very, very poor side of town, and we would take some kids that either, had lost their father or their mother or didn't have any parents at all. And we would take them on a rock climb, just way out of their environment, and just a short, climb and a short rappel. And, I was fascinated, even I was 15, I think, maybe 16 at that time. But I was so fascinated when you would see these kids that really had never experienced anything like that in their life ever. And their eyes would light up, and then they would smile, and then you would hear them talking about it as you was, descending down the trail back to this band that we had hired. And just like they were just way over the moon. And, my hope that just that experience, offered them some self-motivation, some like success, just something different out of their norm. And, from then on, really up to the accident, I just continued to climb and made multiple trips out west, went to Europe, and always was searching for sort of colder weather, deeper snow, and, kind of pushing the boundaries as much as I could. And then, of course, when I put the expedition together with some friends down into Mexico, my whole life, it came to an abrupt end, on Pico de Orizaba quickly.
Obviously, you were in Mexico. How old were you again?
I think I was 19. I always say 20, but I think I was 19.
So you were still a baby.
I was still a baby, but we put this expedition together. We were going to do the 3 volcanoes there. And, our first one was Pico de Orizaba. I'm there with a few friends. And, it was kind of back in those days, it wasn't that you just wrote the check, hopped on a plane, and you went to the Himalayas or you went to the Alps. Really, there was I think much more respect in a sense that if you really wanted to climb in the Himalaya, you really needed to kind of pay your dues a bit. And, Mexico was kind of that next step. And then, of course, we had South America on the calendar for soon thereafter. And then, of course, hopefully into Europe, into the Alps. And then, maybe, God willing, to the Himalayas. And, but I'm near the very top of Orizaba. I could see the summit. And, it's hard now to really still talk about it. But if you can imagine, was every color that your brain can come up with, right? That's how it seemed to me at that time. I had never been this high in my life. And I saw the summit, I knew. And I remember thinking, it's like, my God, Gary, this is that next step. This is that next step. And as soon as I had that thought, my friend yells out, Guller, I'm falling, Guller, I'm falling. And I looked back very quickly behind me, and he had basically come off this little ice step and was falling backwards. So I immediately went down into the ice to try to stop his fall with my ice axe, and we're hooked together, tied together on the same rope team. And before I could do that, he pulled me off the ice, and then I pulled my climbing partner and best buddy off the ice. And God, 1,500, maybe 1,600 feet later, we just stopped. And on the second day, I lost my best friend. And thankfully, a day and a half after that, some folks found us. My family was on the East Coast, so they flew me basically to Duke University as fast as they could. And my other friend went to California. His family was in San Jose. And the doctor coming in after sort of laying there for a few months and saying, I've been a neurosurgeon for 30 plus years. And the damage is so extensive in your spinal cord that your left arm and your shoulder is never going to be the same. And it's never going to come back. And, as you were saying, I was 19, 20 years old. I was a kid. I just wanted to climb freaking mountains and travel the world and experience people and culture and lands. I never thought I'd be laying on my back and a neurosurgeon coming in. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to hear from anyone in my life. And I was lost. And I was lost for a number of years after that.
I can imagine. I mean, talk about the ultimate disruption as a 20-year-old, right? You've got your whole. I was doing some climbing in the Sierras at that time, in the 70s, and they were mostly 14,000 foot, 13,000 foot peaks. But I mean, I was fortunate. Nothing ever catastrophic happened, but a couple close calls where a climbing friend of mine was above me and, stepped on a loose rocks and a big rock avalanche would come tumbling down and, fortunately, would go by me by a foot or two. But, if it was 6 inches one way or the other, I could have easily been down at the bottom of that slope as well. So amazing story. And so tell us what happened. So obviously you're 20 years old. They amputate your arm. You still got I'm 62 years old and I still got the climbing bug, right? So I know you can't get it out of your system. And I am nothing compared to what the kind of stuff you were doing. So then what happens?
Yes, I was this disruptor for a number of years. I mean, when I look back, I was just doing things that I can't even imagine. I'm just not proud of that period of my life. And it went on for 4 or 5 years, too long, really. And I eventually said, what, enough is enough. I'm starting over. And I went back to where I was born. I went back to England and just wanted really to start a whole nother life and not necessarily at that time, really, I didn't want to be associated. There was press about the accident. A lot of people knew about it. It was like, that almost defined me. And I was like, I'm not tired of telling the story back then, but it seemed like that was the only thing people wanted to hear. So I decided just to start again, and my grandfather was still alive at the time, and he lived in England. And I remember he came up to me one day, and he knew that I had been up to no good. And he looked at me, and he put these big British builders' hands around my face, and he was like, "Gary, you gotta get your shit together. And if there's not a person in the world that has climbed some of the highest mountains with one arm," he said, "be the first." That's when it started. I mean, I started then going to North Wales, Scotland, with meeting new friends. And then, a mountaineer sort of took me under his wing for a short time, and we adapted and tried different things. And then eventually, in the mid-90s, I got that opportunity to go to the Himalayas, and life hasn't been the same since on so many levels, right? Just my first minute landing in Kathmandu, I mean, in a sense, that was almost enough. That was almost enough. And then to go on your first trek and then try to, I was on a Lhotse expedition back in 97 and really fail, but learn a lot at the same time, and meeting the Sherpa people, as you know, and the culture and the colors and the cuisine and even the smoky tuk-tuks, right? Just it was what I needed in my life. It was what I needed to kickstart, relight, that positive avalanche, I call it sometimes, right? Just light yourself again. And, and I kept going back. I mean, I was hooked, and I still keep going back so much as I could. And to be able to tie, part of my sort of adventure life into and with the corporate world and then with the nonprofit and, try to do some good, I think, in the world. I don't know if there is a better way for me anyway, a better way to live.
Cool.
I'm going to kind of hop in on this portion here, John. So, and John has heard this story hundreds of times. I was borderline also getting into some things that I probably shouldn't be getting into as a teenager, right? Yeah. And
so we're disruptors.
Started getting caught. And, I essentially had the same conversation with my grandfather. Right. He was actually the one that pulled me out of my pit and told me, get your shit together. He's the one that told me, you're going to join the Air Force. And I always say my grandpa pulled a card that is irreversible because he's on his deathbed. And he said, this is my final wish.
Oops.
And so I have his dog tags tattooed on my chest. I go to visit him in the cemetery at least once a quarter because talking to that man is my entire inspiration for everything that I do. So I wanted to say, Gary, I 110% feel that when you said that, the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. And then for all of us, as what I really view as our charge as disruptors is to be that person that sparks a conversation like our grandfather sparked with us to other people, because sometimes people get so caught in the weeds of their own lives that they need that objective vision, come in from the outside and repaint what they're capable of and readjust their lenses, adjust their prescription on their glasses so they can see more clearly. And the fact that went through what you did, you had that period of time where you're off track and then you be ripped back by an objective person like your grandfather, and then both of us, and there's so many millions of other people out there that have experienced the same thing, feel this now burning passion and this charge to go at and impact lives. So I just wanted to throw that in there that, that really just emotionally punched me in the face. So I'm grateful for that on an amazing Monday morning here on Disruptor.
Cool.
All right on.
So back to the corporate world you mentioned. So a little story about how you and I first met. I think it was 2010. So I think you were still relatively early in the motivational speaking gig. I think we were at an IBM regional sales kickoff meeting of some sort. If you probably don't remember, I had just been promoted to management. So I had, if you will, needless to say, was facing what I would call a Everest caliber challenge of trying to lead a sales team here in the Eastern United States. And you gave your pitch, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But that was great, and obviously you hit my mountaineering bug, a chord, if you will. But what was really cool, and you, to be honest, you were the one that motivated me to get to Nepal in 2014. But what I really enjoyed about meeting you is at the end, we sat around a table, we had a couple of beers. I don't know if you remember this, we shot the shit, we were talking. I mean, the thing about climbers, Jan, or mountaineers, is we can talk about mountains all day long, right? We'll, and it's just one of those things. It's sort of, I don't know what it is. It gets in our blood, and we will sit there and we'll BS for it. So that was sort of how you and I met, and that was 2010-ish. So it's been almost 11 years, over 11 years or over 10 years. So anyway, that's sort of the backstory on my end. But what I wanted to get to next, obviously, is the expedition. So you, as you say, were probably the leader of the most diverse team ever to reach Everest Base Camp. And for those of you that aren't into the mountaineering world, Everest Base Camp in itself is a feat. It's of 17,598 feet. So I mean, it's way higher than any mountain I've ever climbed. And so tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea. That's what really got me. In my world, we'd call that a big, hairy, audacious goal, or a BHAG. And a little bit about the team and what you did and how it came about, right? And because it's fascinating, I think.
Yeah, thanks for just everything you just said, John. And I got to give a shout out to the organization you work with, IBM. IBM's been a huge supporter of me over the years. I mean, from the very, very get-go. was one of just a handful of the early companies way back in 2003 that, invited me to their campus there in Austin, Texas, and said they, wanted to be involved with the messaging with the expedition. And, their only sort of requirement was that I wasn't allowed to say that they were a sponsor, but they didn't have a problem with me saying that they were a partner. And they wanted me to come back if it was successful, to come back to the one of my first presentations, the lunch cafeteria in Austin, Texas, and just share the story with them. And I mean, I could go on for an hour then, or more. I could go for hours about then who I met at that presentation that I did, and how our friendship developed, and then how I was invited to Florida, and then some other senior people at IBM saw me, invited me to another event that led me to our monk, and then it went on and on and on. So I'm grateful to IBM for their support and their continued support. I mean, for sure. But in a nutshell, I've tried Everest since 2001, and I didn't make it very far. I mean, honestly, physically, I thought I was okay, but mentally, I just wasn't there in the right headspace, and I remember getting off the plane. I was living in Austin at the time, getting off the plane, and there were a lot of people from the community just kind of rooting me on and telling me how I inspired them, not because of how far I got on Everest, but because I got on the plane and actually just tried, I got invited a few weeks after that to give a slideshow out in West Texas in El Paso. And at the end of that little, basically PowerPoint, here's the Rockies, here's Mexico, here's Europe, the lights came on in the back of the room. I saw this gentleman, and he could only move one part of his body, but I could tell he wanted to ask me a question. And I walked to the back of the room and I said, "Yes, sir, what is your question?" And I could see it was a person with quadriplegia and had limited movement. And he looked at me and he said, "Mr. Guller, would you ever take somebody like me to some of the places that you've been to?"
Oh,
right. And immediately, in my mind, I was like, not only does he have this pretty severe physical challenge, I think he's a little bit freaking nuts too, right? And we're great friends.
Fits right in with us, right?
Yeah. Right. And he is a little bit crazy. He's a lot crazy.
Gotta be. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful person. But, and then, I thought about it. I always say that one of the greatest lessons I've learned from the Sherpa people is that they have this wonderful ability to look beyond what they see in a human being. They have this ability to look towards somebody's heart first, and not look towards somebody's heart, but they have a wonderful ability. You feel like they're looking at you and to your heart and inside of your soul. And, I thought about it, and I was so inspired by this event, because it was an event on equality and equal access and accessibility, and half the people in the audience had some sort of physical or cognitive challenge. But it wasn't just those people that inspired me. It was their employers were there, their teammates were there, their partners, or husbands or wives. They were all there. And it was just this collective force of just compassion and kindness and love, and just people wanting to explore and try to have whatever a normal life is, but have an equal life to somebody, let's say, that doesn't have a physical or a cognitive challenge, or as much as possible. And I decided I want to go back to Everest. And I was so blown away by this event that I decided, I want to take a group of people representing just about every type of person you can possibly imagine, including those with physical challenges, including those who've never been on a freaking camping trip before. I didn't really know how to do things back in those days. At that time, I think I was like minus $275 in the bank, but I, did my research, and I put out this little PSA. It probably wasn't in the right format or anything. And one radio station picked up on it and said, I'm going back to Everest and I want to take a team with me. And within 4 or 5 weeks, I probably had a team of 30 members, and 14 of those had varying degrees of physical and cognitive challenges. And again, I'm very appreciative of the better situation I'm in now, but I'm not joking at all. I had minus $300 in the bank, and I had this idea and this team all ready to go, and I put pencil to paper, and this thing was going to near 3, 4, 5, almost $500,000.
I'd imagine.
So you imagine, I got to go knocking on some doors, right? And I hadn't been in Texas for very long, and people that understand Texas will get this. Texas is one of the greatest states, I think, in the country, because once you get into the sort of, I think, the corporate world, the business folks, and you earn their trust, they never forget that, and that is so very true. But it takes a while. And at that time, my hair was a little long. I had this funky sort of English, Carolina, Texas, global accent. I don't think I owned a pair of shoes at the time. And imagine, you're a CFO. You'll get this job, or, Jan, you're CFO of an organization, and then through the door comes this guy with shorts, long hair, his hair pulled back, some old, like, barn age from the 70s, and sits down in front of you and says, "Hi, Mr. and Mrs. CFO, my name's Gary Guller. I got this great idea, and I need you to get involved with it." "Okay, yes, sir. Please tell what your story is." "Well, I want to be the first guy to stand on top of the world with one arm. And you know what? Before that, I want to lead the largest diverse team ever to Mount Everest Base Camp. Some of the folks are in wheelchairs. How about writing me a check for $500,000?
Man, I thought I've had some tough pitches in my life. That is, but the thing is that like you're saying that, and I'm connecting with it because I mean I walk in boots, jeans, belt buckle. I'm just me. You walk in, you're just you. And the thing I think is beautiful, and what you're going to really give people confidence to do after this episode is understand, if you truly are passionate, 110% believe in an idea. And sometimes it's just walking by faith and not by what you can see, because there's going to be like, somehow this is going to come together. I don't know how, but this is what is on my heart to get done. Something like the bricks are going to lay themselves. And that was to give you the confidence to go into a room like that. And then those CFOs are looking back and saying, is this dude nuts? I feel like, is he serious? But then at the same time, they're like, in order to have that much conviction, you have to be ready to take it all the way through. And so I would actually probably say that there's a little bit of confidence, or at least curiosity, that gets spiked on their end. They're like, what if it is possible?
Right, exactly. Right. I mean, I think the number one, it took me a little while because I was like, why are you not going to be part of this? I can't understand why you would not want to be part of this. But I didn't know the whole deal about really sponsorships, at this level, and partnerships. And, I had a number of folks, and, I've mentioned the organizations before that said, hey, they'd be happy. I mean, financially, it was a tough proposition in the sense that things can go horribly wrong, right? In the mountains, mountaineering, altitude, even flying, getting there, etc.
Just getting to Lukla alone is a life-threatening, risky adventure, right?
Yes, I mean, totally, right? And what company wants to see, their logo or their corporate name, on 27 expedition bags, 3,000 feet down in the bottom of the canyon with a few people laying beside them? That's not a real good image to project, right? But I did figure out really quickly, I had a number of organizations that said, explained to me why they couldn't financially get involved as a sponsor, but they could get involved as a partner. And, I was born at night, but I'll tell you guys, I wasn't born last night. And once I figured that part out, I was like, okay, well, I can start leveraging these partnerships into perhaps some other people that don't mind either anonymously throwing in some cash. And basically that's it finally came together. Barely.
So tell the audience, because I know exactly how, I sort of know the proportion of trekkers to porters to Sherpas, right? So, but give the people a little feel of, you had, how many people were you trying to take up? I forget. It's 16?
No. Yeah, so we had 30 sort of. 30. We had 30. We had 28 Westerners. And then I just didn't want it to be just about, Americans, right? Or even, we had a couple of Canadians as well. We also had 2 Sherpa.
Those guys were awesome, man. I met so many people like that, those 2 that you had in the movie. I'll send you a picture. I swear to God, I met the guy's brother, right?
No, of course, and he probably was related. I mean, all the Sherpa generally are the same family. But yeah, I mean, one of the guys, both were bitten by cobras in the village. So one guy had, and that's a quick amputation in the village, bitten by a cobra. So one guy he was missing his right arm, and the other guy was missing his left leg. And they are also part of the expedition. And I swear on my life, I remember we were at a hotel near Bodhanath in Kathmandu, and I had never met these gentlemen before, but Nemadao Sherpa, a dear friend of mine, had told me about these gentlemen before. So I kind of knew what to expect. But think about this. So the floors in the Hyatt Hotel actually are not marble, but there's some rock or something very, very slippery. This guy's probably 60 years old, is missing his leg, and he comes from the village, and he cannot even walk through the foyer there in the hotel because his crutches are made of just wood with no rubber slip or nothing under his shoulders. So he's walking and he's sliding on these heavily waxed floors. And, finally he made it over, and we all sat in a chair, and all the team came there, and, we at least made it to Kathmandu, so we got to get up into the hills there pretty soon. But when we landed up into Lukla, as you mentioned, John, I mean, Lukla's a short takeoff and landing airstrip. The damn thing's about 73 feet long, right? And then the runway is a mountain face, and the other end, when you depart the village, on this short takeoff and landing airstrip. There's about a 3,000 foot drop off. So you start having a whole other appreciation for when you land brakes and for when you take off acceleration, right? Yeah. And, so immediately we had 30, made it to Lukeland. Then I had to I'd sent Sherpa up in advance. So in the very early stages of this expedition, at any one given time, I had over 300 people working.
Yeah, I was going to say, because that's a pretty good, even our trip was the proportions to trekkers, to porters, to Sherpas was quite large, and you obviously needed more people. So let's get back to Everest. So obviously you get this team up there, and it's amazing. You break a world record, but, at that point, you're like, most of us would have turned around and gone home. But you obviously decided that the next thing to do was to try to scale the peak. And you became the first person with one arm to climb Mount Everest. Now, again, Mount Everest is 29,028 feet, so it's another 10,000 feet above base camp. But to start off, when you start off from base camp to get to Camp 1, right, you've got to go across the treacherous and infamous Humbar Icefall. And I think you've got a really neat story about your trip. And you were with Nima Dawa as your Sherpa that helped you through the expedition. And I think you had an experience on the Icefall that was probably pretty inspiring.
Like even when I even share the story now, even when Nima and myself talk about the story, right, it's still hard to believe how it all sort of unfolded, where we left base camp. And you leave very early because you want to get through the icefall when the ice is very hard. But that icefall is one of the scariest places in the world. There's crevasses you can't see the bottoms of. You have to cross these crevasses on these like old rickety ladders. And there's avalanches that are happening. It's moving. It's its own life force, really. And a lot of people heard a few years back, we lost almost 20 Sherpa in one avalanche. That's 20 Sherpas and 20 Sherpa families, kids, wives, husbands. It's scary. And we're about halfway through the icefall, and we hear this boom, boom. And it's the sounds you don't want to hear when you're in the icefall, because generally that means that something broke somewhere, right? And we both stopped and we looked up, we looked around, and we couldn't see where it was, but we knew that wasn't a good sound to hear. So we tried to pick up our pace as much as you can, like at 18 and 19,000 feet for the first time. And then we heard it again. It was like, oh, but it was like 3 times as loud, 3 times as long. And we looked up, and at the top of the icefall, this avalanche is coming directly toward Nimadawa Sherpa and myself. And honestly, at that time, I thought, it's over, bloody hell, you've come all this way. You're very successful with the team, getting into base camp with some enjoyment and some happiness. And Gary, before you get to Camp 1, your life is done. And Nima put his arms around me, and he thought the same. And I put my arms around him, and it was like just before the impact of this avalanche was about to hit us, Nima he let go, reached into his pocket, and he threw something 3 times in the path of the avalanche. And then he quickly came back and he put his arms around me. And honestly, it seemed like a lifetime. It was maybe 6 seconds, 7 seconds. And then everything just stopped. Everything, and it was so quiet. So very quiet. And I opened up my eyes and I looked at Nima, and I could barely see him because of all the debris. But I knew he was still attached to me, and me, obviously, him. And I wouldn't say laugh about it now, but we're grateful. But we both thought at that time, this is where you go. We thought maybe this is heaven, right? We couldn't see anything else. It's just this big cloud of snow, dust, and ice. We're like, this is it. And then it settled. And then we realized that we made it and we were alive. And as I'm dusting off the snow and the ice from Nima's helmet and his shoulders, I looked at him and I said, Nima, what did you throw in the path of that avalanche? I watched you. You threw something 3 times very quickly. And apparently when I went back to Kathmandu to say goodbye to the base camp team, he went back to this village by the name of Pangboche and paid a very old man. When I mean an old man, I don't mean this guy's 58. This guy's 558. And he's the Lama. He's sort of a spiritual leader for the Khumbu Valley. And Nima went back to see that man, and he asked that man for a special blessing, and that 560-plus-year-old man gave him some rice, and he told Nima, if danger comes your way, throw this rice 3 times in the path of the danger, and you'll be all right. I mean, I still have some rice that I carry with me sometimes, but was it the rice? I don't know.
Dude, I'd be carrying rice too.
Right?
Man.
Or was it that old man, But I tell you, over the years, especially now, I think this story has even a greater meaning now, I mean, we've had one massive avalanche last year, and it's like a continuing avalanche still going into this year. What I got from that whole near-death experience was that Nima believed in that rice, and Nima believed in that old man, and Nima believed in me, and I equally believed in him. And that is what got us through. Simple belief in yourself and belief in others. Because here's the gig, right? If Nima would have went this way, and I would have looked after myself and went the other way, I would not be here this morning sharing this story. We stuck together through what was almost certainly a dying situation. But we stuck together, we remained calm, but we continued to believe in ourselves. And that's why I'm here. And that's why we're still friends. And that's why we're still together. And I think in the whole world now, people have to start believing back in themselves and into other people, especially as we crawl out of this massive continued pandemic avalanche, right?
100%. I'm going to pull up some pictures for just because our audience, I feel like, may not be as quite well versed in the climbing. So I know I had to do a little bit of research into the actual pathway. So I'm going to pull up a picture here that actually shows a little bit of where that path is. So right there we can see that Khumbu icefall above base camp. That's really the first step. You're entering the journey into actually climbing. I mean,
exactly.
That's kind of the first thing that you guys are going to have to get through. So your journey was almost over before it even started.
Exactly.
It was.
Way up. And then there's a couple. Go ahead, John.
Well, I was going to say, the one thing that we didn't mention is, it took Gary and his team about, 3 weeks to get from Lukla up to base camp, the team of the expedition team. But then you just don't turn around and start climbing base Everest, right? I think you spent probably another 2 or 3, probably 4 weeks up on the mountain to just right there, because you spend a week or two acclimating, and then you do a couple of practice climbs. Today you go up to Camp 1, come back down, right? And so, then you get to Camp 2, and of course then you got to deal with the weather and the weather windows. So we're talking about, right, 3 weeks on the trek to base camp, and then another 4 weeks trying to summit the mountain. So at that point in time, you're basically out there for about 2 months. And so, I mean, this is a major commitment of time. There's Diwa Sherpa. And speaking of Sherpas, while you're pulling that up, I want to talk to you. I got to give a shout out to the Sherpas that I worked with. Mm-hmm. Because when I was in Nepal, we had 3 Sherpas and 5 porters. And our trekking company was organized or run by a guy named Ang Jangbu Sherpa. But our lead Sherpa was a guy named Lapsang Sherpa. And we had 2 other, and he was older than I am. So he was probably, at the time, close to 60, maybe even over that. And again, you would never know, right? I mean, he could run up and down those mountains like there was no tomorrow. And then we had a couple of younger guys, Punru Sherpa and Joe Baharu. Punru was excellent. He actually spent some time in the United States, up in your part of the world, in Washington, Oregon. He climbed Mount Hood a couple of times. He's climbed Kilimanjaro. But a little funny story just as a reminder. So we're on the second day. The first day is pretty easy. The second day, we're starting to get some terrain. And as Lapsang used to tell us, you never go flat in Nepal. You're either going up or you're going
right.
down. Right?
little up, little down.
Yeah. And it's funny, you'd walk up 1,000 or 2,000 feet and you'd come around this turn, and all of a sudden you've got to go all the way back down the other side to cross some bridge, across, some river. But we're trekking along, and my buddy's with me, and he says, "Hey, Punru, have you ever done this trek before?" And I goes, "No, this is my first time." And we were going to the Annapurna Sanctuary. So we were eventually going to get up to Montepachuri Base Camp and then up to Annapurna Base Camp. And we're sort of scratching our head. And he goes, yeah, no, I don't normally do this. My day job, if you will, is I do Everest trips. My buddy goes, well, have you ever climbed Everest? And he goes, yeah, 7 times. And today, I believe he's got 3 more. So I think he's up to 9 or 10 times up Everest. The guy was great.